and welcome to episode 21 of March to the Sea, the Vandals Let's Play series for Total War Attila. Last time, Genseric was at first distraught about his lack of a role in the war against Attila, but eventually inspired to capture the holy city of Constantinople in an effort to spread the faith of the Arian confession from one of the great bishoprics of Christianity. Saphrax took up the call to arms, raising a new army, the Thunder and Lightning, to defend the holy city. The Carian Crows were once again deprived of their commander as they were ridden down by two Hunnic hordes, but a few of the men once again narrowly escaped with their lives to the safety of a river crossing. We faced a revolt by a local governor at Aquitania, which Swinthila was fortunately able to put down, while Argebaud took the Solitude on a tour of destruction through the Western Roman Separatist-held territories in Eastern Europe, but he was forced to flee before the re-emergence of Attila and the Horsemen of the Steppe from the east.
All rise in acknowledgement of the majesty of his grace, Augustus Theodosius Arcadius Vindonius Granius Alba, Emperor of the mighty Roman Empire, and ruler of the holy city of Constantine in absentia.
Step forward, Vandal. You bring news from Genseric?
Yes, sire. Our King Genseric has recaptured the holy city of Constantinople from your heathen enemies, and even now he labors to rebuild the holy church there.
This is most welcome news. Please prepare the fleet and my personal ship. We shall sail as soon as possible to reclaim the throne there.
I'm sorry, sire, but Genseric asked that you remain here in Libya. We cannot admit you to Constantinople with the land in turmoil as it is. It is simply too dangerous with the Huns on one side and the Sassanids on the other. Rather, Genseric will rule in your name as Roman Emperor until such a time as he deems fit for your return.
What? Gorgisel's bastard is an arrogant prick, and I do not trust him to rule my empire, diplomatic treaties notwithstanding. I will claw my way up the Phoenician coastline and across Asia to my capital city. And when I get there, he'd better not be sitting on my throne. I require assurances, or we will sever our alliance with you, along with the lucrative trade agreement your greedy little monarch prizes so highly.
Of course. Genseric desires that your mother, Aelia Eudoxia, return with me to Constantinople. She will join with Genseric's nephew in marriage, and her counsel as to local and imperial governance will be heeded.
Very well then. My sisters are already Vandal courtesans, so you may as well take my mother. But she's not the fool my father was. I would reclaim the land he lost and more. And remember, Vandal, you will tell Genseric he is to be gone from my throne upon my return.
Be welcome. Let us talk.
Genseric would like to continue his crusade, and I've eventually got to control all of Insulae Orientalis, and the Visigoths, friendly though they may be, are standing in my way in this regard. Not only have the Eastern Roman Empire begun to aggressively re-expand, acquiring several territories beyond Libya, but they have also acquired a couple of tributary states, including the Axum, the Visigoths, and annoyingly my neighbors, the African Separatists. I tried to encourage the Eastern Romans to relinquish their hold over the Visigoths so I can declare war if I wish, but they stubbornly refuse. I don't want a war with the Eastern Romans right now, so I settle for yet another diplomatic marriage, Aelia Eudoxia, a decorous older woman, to Alaric. She may not bear any children for him, but that's not much of a consideration this far into the campaign. In the Balkan Peninsula, Argebaud is still moving back, the Solitude weakened from their recent expedition and retreating from the Hunnic threat. I move him back toward the Marcomanni-held Salona for the time being. There's a Hunnic army nearby, but they don't appear to be in range for an attack. Friedebald moves east into Constantinople to supervise the building there. I finish tearing down the Eastern Christian Church and convert the bazaar over to a meeting hall so that I can get some public order. The food trader I leave in place along with the sewers, since these buildings together are providing adequate food and sanitation right now. I don't quite have enough wealth for the settlement conversion right now. Friedebald then moves off to attempt to deal with the Kartli agent across the Strait of Bosphorus, but his effort ends in failure. Back in Cisalpine Gaul, Indulf is still consumed with thoughts of revenge over the loss of his son. He takes the oath east to encounter the servants of the Khan. The balance bar gives me an even chance, but I have faith in Indulf's generalship, so I fight the battle manually. The map indicates we'll be fighting in an area of fairly dense forest, which should be a benefit for us against cavalry. Even better, we see at the outset that the enemy has a bit of a climb to reach our position, so I should be able to take advantage of the slope of the battlefield as well. I set up on the right-hand side of the deployment zone, stretching out my spears as much as I can to counter the numerous cavalry. My cavalry I put off to the left in the trees. I'm definitely going to take advantage of the Alani war dogs to disrupt the enemy attack their archers, and exhaust the heavy onager shots. I move the main force forward, still near the top of the hill and still out of range of the Huns onagers. My Alani spearmen get fairly close before they release their hounds, which rip into the first units of archers. By the time the hounds have finished their work, breaking the first unit of archers, and the Huns start moving forward, the large onagers have used nearly all of their ammunition, and I've lost less than 25% of the Alani spearmen, who continue making their way back to my battle line. The hounds continue running amok behind the enemy lines, finishing off the fleeing archers and then attacking the enemy general's cavalry retinue. The first wave of hunted cavalry approach my line, struggling up the hill, and my onagers begin delivering their flaming ammunition into the enemy ranks, while my archers open fire. The Alani spearmen have come under attack by a group of Hunnic horse archers, and they're still pretty far off from my line, so I decide to just attack the horse archers to chase them off, knowing this will probably doom the Alani spearmen, but hoping it will let me further divide the enemy forces. My longbowmen inflict heavy casualties on the elite knockers approaching my left-hand flank, and they temporarily break from the casualties sustained. I bring my own cavalry back behind my line to address the right-hand flank, which has already depleted units of first-wave lancers and knockers approaching. The lancers fortunately shouldn't get a good charge due to the terrain, and they wind up getting overrun by my Germanic horsemen. At the same time, the knockers inflict a somewhat awkward oblique charge on my Germanic spearmasters. I'm sure they'll inflict some significant casualties, but the spearmasters should be able to prevail. The lancers take a while for my Germanic horsemen to bring them down, but they don't inflict many casualties. On the left flank, my Alani spearmen have been destroyed, but the knockers are now permanently shattered. My archers and onagers switch their fire to the oncoming infantry, firing barrages of arrows and flaming projectiles into their midst. With the lancers destroyed, my horsemen pursue the withdrawing knockers on the right. The infantry lines engage one another with several elite Hunnic units charging uphill at my spearmen, including Bosphorian infantry and Chozanuar warriors, along with their top-tier Skirii spearmen. I move up the Germanic axemen and the Vandal berserkers to meet them in melee, while my two free units of Germanic spearmasters begin moving into the enemy flanks on either side. The enemy general Edico has joined the fight in the center, but his regiment quickly takes some severe casualties as he comes under assault by my best and most aggressive infantry. As my berserkers plow through the remnants of the Hunnic infantry on the left, they launch a volley of javelins into the Hunnic general's retinue, and Edico is forced back from the fighting as my left-hand battle line wraps around the Huns fighting my spearmen. My cavalry have meanwhile split up into a few groups, one sent off in pursuit of the remaining regiment of Uar archers and another chasing down the Hunnic horse archers on the right. The elite Hunnic swordsmen managed to finally break through the center of my line. Although it's a hollow victory for them, as they try to reach my archers, they become overwhelmed by the Vandal berserkers. My other two units of spearmasters have maneuvered all the way to the enemy rear, and they, along with two of my cavalry units, move in for the kill. Although still alive, Edico by this point has fled the battlefield. The only real threat left is the three units of mixed horse archers and devil archers in the trees to the left, but they seem to be reacting to their destruction of their infantry and the flight of their general as one of the units breaks and the other two waver. My infantry massacre the remainder of the Huns fighting in the melee, and the last of the Hunnic horse archers retreat at the sight of my Germanic horsemen closing in on them. I spend a few more minutes sending my horsemen all over the map to pursue what's left of the servants of the Khan, although I'm not able to catch all of their cavalry. We earned a heroic victory, taking substantial but realistic losses given the elite enemy units. Although we killed 1,610 of the 1,685 men of the servants of the Khan, Edico and 2 of his bodyguard alone with a depleted unit of devil archers managed to escape from Indulf. The army is so depleted, however, that I doubt they'll be able to pose much of a threat in the near future. Hethan moves off to the east to scout the area around the Danube River for any signs of Attila. Next, I turn my attention to the Western Roman Separatists, who have recovered much of their strength since our forces met in the previous war. Vinitha moves westward to enter the movement of the Heralds of Lienth, a large Western Roman Separatist army north of Mediolanum. Following that success, Dromihete takes his army east to encounter the Spears of Minerva, who are a small and depleted force and easily destroyed in a quick auto-resolve battle. The Seekers of Glory get new traditions from their experience, and I select Guerrilla War and Ruin of Rome, both handy in the current situation, and both steps on the way to immunity to winter attrition. I move Hermenegild west to reinforce the Ostrogoths at Mediolanum in case they're attacked, while Swinthila brings the Giants back east to Aqua Sextii, with about 1/3 of his men having settled down to colonize Ilusa in Bertigala last episode. Scarillo moves ashore at Constantinople to help with the public order there, and to take her place at the new Arian Christian matriarchal seat. It's also time to start moving Hanilo, with Britannia now solidly Arian Christian and public order there at an acceptable level. I notice while I'm there that the Britons have amassed a small but significant force, so I press them for a non-aggression treaty, not wanting to resort to hostility, at least not right now, as they are allied with the Franks. Having already spent some of the wealth for this turn on various agent actions and a few buildings here and there, I can't afford the settlement conversion for Constantinople, and it will be prohibitively expensive due to cultural penalties, so I decide to go ahead and downgrade the settlement by 1 tier so I can afford the conversion next turn. I'll need a Germanic-style settlement here so I can recruit troops in the province. I decide to keep the pressure on the Kartli by taking Genseric out of Constantinople into the port settlement of Cyzicus, where he overruns the local garrison, sacking the settlement and then liberating the Asia faction, who emerge as our new allies in Asia Minor. Salt in the wound for the Kartli is that the governor of the Asia province was the Kartli king, also killed in Genseric's assault. Genseric moves back to Constantinople and merges some of his depleted units. With what remains of my wealth for the turn, I expend on upgrades to the port and settlement structures at Neapolis and Italia, and add some troops to Gismus's Brothers of Stone at Carthage, where the offshore Abashar are looming. Following this, I end the turn. During the end-turn phase, the Ostrogoths drive off the Western Roman Separatist army nearest to Mediolanum. The Huns pull back their armies slightly from Salona, but otherwise exhibit little activity. The Kartli withdraw completely from Constantinople, apparently having gotten the message sent by Genseric. Asia asks for a trade agreement, to which I agree. Just when I think I've gotten out of the intern phase without too much trouble, the Western Roman Separatists mount their attack on Dromihete and the Seekers of Glory. My army is full strength and by itself a much better force than any of the others, but the balance bar is heavily against me as they bring 3 different armies to the battlefield. Dromihete orders his men to retreat, but they don't get far, making it just inside of the Allied territory. Although it doesn't look like it, it's actually the southern tip of the Saxon-held Uberzus. Unfortunately, this remains in range for all 3 of the Western Roman Separatist armies, so Dromihete is forced to fight with his back to the mountains. We're facing off against 3 armies, the largest and least depleted of which is the Standards of Caesar led by Appius Nero, an infantry-only legion composed almost entirely of what seems to be the Western Roman Separatist favorite unit type, Western Auxilia Palatina Spearmen. They're reinforced by the Vengeance of Vetus, led by Vendonius Celsus, a more balanced but severely depleted army of spearmen and legio with some cavalry, and the Heirs of Mars, led by the Western Roman Separatist faction leader, Appius Antoninus, who is leading what looks like a small group of nomadic levy and Germanic mercenary regiments. There's a slight slope to the battlefield and a few trees, but for the most part, it's mostly open and flat. I set up on the left-hand side of my deployment zone, knowing the bulk of the enemy will be coming from straight ahead, but not sure where the reinforcements will be coming from. At the start of the battle, I do see at least Appius Nero and some of his spearmen oriented obliquely to our line in the distance, and I begin angling my battle line to square up with his. As my infantry get themselves into position, and the onagers slowly trundle behind, I send my cavalry off toward Appius Nero's left flank. At this point, I now see where the enemy reinforcements are coming from. Numerous cavalry units, some of which are quite depleted in number of cavalrymen, appear on my right-hand flank, and 2 of the enemy cavalry units engage my poor onager crew, who are caught in the midst of moving their siege engines. I have broken my spearmasters into 2 groups of 3 each, and the right-hand group engage the enemy cavalry, who are mauling the onager crew. The left-hand group of spearmasters take up a defensive formation facing the enemy horse archers and the oncoming Western Auxilia Palatina. My spearmasters are able to deal with the depleted cavalry units handily, sparing perhaps half the men of the onager crew and driving off the cavalry threat entirely for the moment. Now, though, I'm forced to face an enormous number of Roman spearmen auxiliaries advancing on my position from the front, as well as Appius Antoninus and Vindonius Celsus reinforcements who are approaching from my right flank. Appius Nero has held his retinue back slightly from the long line of spearmen, and my horsemen, emerging from the forest on the left, see a chance to decapitate the snake. My line is formed up in a sort of L shape now to face both threats, notwithstanding 1 regiment of unruly and disobedient spearmasters who have pursued a fleeing unit of enemy cavalry right into the center of the oncoming assault. I struggle to get my errant spearmen back into line, and as the enemy infantry closes with my battle line, my horsemen maneuver for a charge on the enemy general.
Enemy units have returned to the battle.
I look to have gotten a fairly decent one, but as the general and his retinue are heavily armored elite comes, they can take quite a bit of punishment before falling. Fortunately, luck has smiled on us today, and I get a message not long after engaging the enemy general that he's already fallen and in the limited fighting. My front line is now completely engaged, with my spearmasters and axemen fighting savagely against the innumerable Roman spears. My archers have begun firing their armor-penetrating heavy arrows, but with the death of the enemy general, I decide it's time to make the most of the morale shock by mixing in some of the flaming and whistling arrows. There are many wavering enemy units now, but I'm fairly limited in terms of what I can do, as our infantry are engaged in melee everywhere. I would like to have released my warhounds into the enemy flank, but my Alani spearmen unfortunately were not able to completely disentangle themselves from the melee engagement, skirmishing with and ultimately being caught due to their heavy armor by a pursuing Auxilia Palatina unit. My cavalry are taking their sweet time finishing off Appius Nero's comes retinue, who stubbornly refused to break in spite of their commander's death. The Germanic horsemen thrust and parry with their more heavily armored foes, the weight of numbers slowly giving them the advantage. The enemy general's retinue starts to waver, although the Auxilia Palatina morale seems to have mostly stabilized. A second unit of my spearmen start to fall back, and now I have a hole in the right-hand side of my line. However, it's very fortunate for me at this point that the comes retinue breaks and is permanently shattered by my Germanic horsemen, so now I have the weapon I need to turn the battle in my favor. I split up my horsemen, issuing charges all over the place, 2 units crashing into the rear of the enemy line of spears and the other 2 pursuing the infantry and horse archers. This is definitely the last straw for the enemy morale, and the chain rout ensues, and now the real killing begins. I can't hope to catch all of the fleeing enemies, but I try to maximize their losses by plowing the horsemen through large groups of infantry and cutting off their escape as they approach the border of the battlefield. I can't catch all of the horse archers, unfortunately, so total annihilation is out of the question. We get a heroic victory for our efforts, suffering some fairly severe losses among our spearmen. But they did not give their lives in vain, for Appius Nero lost 2,500 of his 3,800 deployed men. Lucky for me, none of my regiments were completely lost. This is a great time to take on warriors from the large number of enemy captives, as I'll get a spectacular 14% replenishment. None of the enemy armies are completely eliminated, but they're so crippled that they pose essentially no further threat. There have been a couple of agent actions against us, but nothing too serious. In Macedonia, Saphrax and his small but potent army move north to Tremontium, where I recolonize the region. I also start rebuilding the settlement structure there. From a cost standpoint, this isn't a very good use of the army, but I feel like I need to take this region with its gold mine before either the Sclavenians or the Budinians move in.
You men are professional soldiers, but as the treasury has been stretched thin, you will be paid in land holdings rather than gold. Genseric promises to each of you an estate of 1,000 Eugera, along with the requisite servants, slaves, and animals for cultivation of your property. The land of your choosing may be selected here in the Thracian hinterland, from the plains southeast of the group of 3 hills known as the Tremontium. You may be aware of gold mines not far from here. Do not seek to claim these or the surrounding property which belongs to the state. You may stake your claim now, and the land will be held in your name to be obtained upon the return from our pending military action in Anatolia. Should your wish be to resign from the army, you may depart unmolested from our ranks to cultivate your farm. For my part, I do not wish for any man who is a true servant of God to leave my service, for the Lord's work has yet to begin in earnest to reclaim the Holy Lands. But for any who doubt our sacred duty, it is best they remain behind.
Argebaud and the Solitude have finally arrived back in friendly territory at the edge of Macedonia, and I used some of my wealth to add a couple of the excellent noble Suebi swordsmen. I have a few loyalty problems among my men. Fortunately, Aelia Eudoxia, widow of the now deceased Eastern Roman Emperor Flavius Arcadius and brand new bride of young Alaric, brings with her tremendous influence thanks to her Eastern Roman connections, and you can also now see how closely Gunderic's line has become entwined with that of Vendonius Helva, the new Eastern Roman Emperor. I'm able to start using Aelia Eudoxia's massive influence to raise Swinthila's loyalty. Swinthila in turn appears to be married to Vendonius Helva's sister. Saphrax's loyalty has also become a bit low at this time, and perhaps that's due to his having been used in the Swords to Plowshares operation in Tremontium, rather than as the Holy Sword of God in this war on heresy. Dromihete, having earned the Warchief skill, fair and square takes his Seekers of Glory to finish what they started. The standards of Caesar now find themselves in flight, evading Dromihete as they retreat northward. However, they've just managed to get themselves into range of Hermanfried, who eagerly takes his glorious reavers out of Argentoridum to crush the enemy. Dromihete then sets off after the vengeance of Vetus, but they too elude his grasp, fleeing further east. The Seekers of Glory have now exhausted their movement for the turn, so it will fall to someone else to press the attack. First, I want to try to hinder the Hunnic hordes to the east who could pose a threat. Fortunately, Venethaharis has a critical success against the Wrath of Erlik, and that should at least force the Huns to engage with only one army if they want to fight next turn. Hermenegild is now free to move his Children of the Forest in to finish off the vengeance of Vetus. His men take minimal losses and wipe out the enemy, then moves back slightly to the southern edge of the mountain pass. Hermenegild the hero also finds some success this turn, harassing the Children of the Larch, the Hunnic army in Dalmatia. I bring in Indulf to test their strength, but finding the balance bar about even, I decide not to press my luck. While I might be able to beat them, my spearmen are so depleted, I'm a little worried about facing the Hunnic cavalry with the oath in this state. Instead, Indulf withdraws the oath and positions them just north of Salona in range of our Marcomanni allies, and a large Quadian force, who would almost likely join our side if it came to battle. I'm getting low on funds for the turn, but one thing I want to take care of is the Abashar, who are now getting dangerously close to the heart of my territory on the coast of Iberia. To counter them, I raise a new fleet, the Black Waters, under a young admiral named Argebaud. Surely not the same Argebaud who is supposed to have died in the defeat of the Carian Crows, but mostly he's just serving as a placeholder until I can recall Dromihete, who is a more capable admiral. I hire several mercenary ships and all of the Skyde longships I can afford from the local port. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to raise this fleet at a military port due to the close proximity of the enemy transports, but this will have to do for now. Speaking of the Carian Crows, they remain in the Italian peninsula, much improved but not completely replenished. I move them up north to Ravenna, so they can add their strength to our other armies should the Huns arrive in Gaul in strength again. I move Hinula back across the strait from Britain into Gaul, and end the turn. During the end turn phase, the Saxons are still asking for our help against the Franks, but I can't be bothered at the moment. At Constantinople, now the Sassanids have brought a fairly large force to lay siege to the great city advancing from the east. One of the Hunnic hordes near Augusta Vandalicorum moves up and makes short work of a small Jute force to the southwest, while far in the east we catch a glimpse of more Huns marauding against the Venetians. The Angles ask for a military alliance. I'm not too crazy about them, as they're a weak nation with only one province, but somehow they've managed to subjugate the Jutes, so I decide to agree to maintain friendly relations in the north. The Abershar retreat on their transports from our navy at Tarraconensis, heading back toward Africa. Scrilo has suffered an extort attempt by one of the Cartly agents at Constantinople, but thankfully it's not a critical success, which would remove her from my service entirely. Also, the siege at Constantinople has resulted in squalid conditions, and there's been an outbreak of the consumption. The marriage of Genseric's daughter to Saphrax has gone off successfully. Now the young powermonger may have a legitimate claim to the throne one day. I finished research on billeting, which is fantastic, breaking in quite a bit of cash due to my enormous army upkeep right now. I decide next to refocus on civil technologies, and specifically on family workshops that will help finish off the third tier of civic technologies, and which allows upgrades to my marble quarry along with a small bonus to wealth. Benito Horace again gets a critical success in his misdirect attempt on the Wrath of Erlik, effectively pinning the horde in place and giving us greater freedom to move on the enemies in the west. Kyrillos also gets a successful harass attempt against the Children of the Larch, further weakening them. I next move Hermanfried east to destroy what remains of the Thunderbolts of the Nine at Augusta Vandalicorum.
Is there nothing else?
The Glorious Reavers are unfortunately just shy of the movement needed to reach Augusta Vandalicorum and do what they do best, so Hermanfried is forced to let his army camp north of the city. Friedebald injures the Cartly agent at Constantinople, sending them back east to recuperate. Genseric does find himself able to sally out of the port at Constantinople to face the Sassanid besiegers across the Strait of Bosphorus, although I had incorrectly assumed that last time he could not. Nevertheless, the balance bar is not too generous, so I hold the Larch and Prows back for now. Saphrax moves his small army into range of the city, but finds himself unable to move into or through the city to meet the attacking force due to the hindering effects on movement of the enemy investment. I have a couple of empty construction sites in Venetia, and I use both of them, one for a well and the other for a farmstead. Admiral Argebaud takes the Blackwaters out from Terracote to nearly reach the fleeing Abershar transports. I'll likely be able to catch them next turn, as they cannot outrun me in the ocean, and will not be able to elude Gismus in Africa. Still in friendly waters, Argebaud recruits a few more ships to enhance his fleet for the inevitable naval assault. At Ravenna, Gripas adds a few more units to the Carrion Crows, finally disbanding the slinger units that have been the core of the army for so long. Hermenegild also adds an additional unit to his force at Verona, while Indulf remains at Aquileia, although it's interesting to note that he seems to have captured one of the Huns' large onagers somewhere along the line. I keep Aelia Eudoxia using her massive influence to improve the loyalty of my generals, this time with Gismus, while her daughter, Comina Attila, does the same for her husband Swinthila, and Bananu, the young Abaskian princess, for Hermenegild, the perpetually headstrong son of Genseric. Following this, I end the turn. During the end turn phase, there's some movement by the Huns in the east, but very little occurring near our armies in the west. The Markomans destroy the small Illyrian army that's been biding its time adjacent to Aquileia. The British forces depart from Camulodunum and begin sailing southward. A little bit of a worrisome move, but again, I can't be bothered with that at the moment. The Glorious Reavers have suffered a harass attempt due to the efforts of an Illyrian veteran. My efforts to improve the loyalty of my generals is met with increasing demands from each of the targets, and where able I pay up, offering large bribes to Hermenegild and Gismus. However, my efforts within Swinthila were unsuccessful, and now Saphrax's loyalty has gotten into the dangerously low range, and Hermanfried and my new admiral Argebaud are not far behind. So I do what I can to continue improving their loyalty, because the last thing I need right now is another civil war. The Budinians are not yet at war with us, but they carry a hostile attitude, and have no compunction about raiding my lands at Tremontium. I decide to let Genseric continue putting up with the siege at Constantinople, while I move Saphrax back to Tremontium to garrison the city's defense. I embark Sindrid into the Sea of Marmara, and he begins crossing to Asia. The Solitude are almost at a full strength, and I move them northeast into Serdica to make an approach to the Western Roman Separatists held Sirmium. Hathan moves further east around the Danube, but he doesn't find any sign of Attila. Hermenegild the hero inflicts another harass army action on the Children of the Larch, and the horde overall is looking quite weakened, even though they're replenishing currently in encampment stance. The Glorious Reavers move south to attack the wayward warriors south of Augusta Vandalicorum, which by the way seems to have been captured by the Ostrogoths. He's reinforced by the Gruthungians and Saxons in the battle. I get a balance bar that's slightly in my favor, and while I'm tempted to fight this battle, I'm not sure if I could rely on my allies to behave appropriately, so I decide to just auto-resolve it, for better or worse. We get a victory, but our losses are quite high, as you can see, with my army losing about half to two-thirds of the men in most of the units, although fortunately only the Alani spearmen are totally wiped out. The result severely weakens one of the two hordes who fall back, while the other is destroyed utterly in the battle. Fortunately for me, I'm now in Allied territory due to the Ostrogothic capture of Augusta Vandalicorum, so I can begin replenishing immediately, and I move both of my armies there, the Glorious Reavers as well as the Seekers of Glory, up to within reinforcement range of the city garrison. I pause my research on family workshops to make the single-turn 10,000 gold investment to purchase the local nobility technology which will finally enable me to build the Tier 4 settlement and food storage buildings. Both Kyrillos and Vinitharis fail their agent actions against the wrath of Erlik, so it looks like I'll have to put up with this army's unhindered movements next turn. I bring Indulf and the Oath up to engage the most eastward hordes in the region, and he attacks the larger of the two, the weakened but still formidable Children of the Larch, in a night battle. I have the balance bar in my favor, so I'm going to risk another auto-resolve here. This time the result is more favorable, as Indulf gets away with only moderate losses and manages to almost completely destroy the Children of the Larch in a decisive victory. He has plenty of movement left, and the Oath are immune to snow attrition, so I'm able to get them back to Aquileia to replenish. Finally, I move the Carian Crows north from Italy to destroy what remains of the wayward warriors. I move the Giants east into Mediolanum so that they too can assist against the Huns. I move Friedebald back to Macedonia, and while he's there with his building cost reduction, I upgrade the olive orchard to Tier 3. The Blackwaters have finally caught up with the Immortals, the Abershar transports off the coast of Africa, and the Navy is able to make short work of the enemy transports, sinking them all. I continue moving the Blackwaters east to retrofit them when they arrive at a military port. Bitharicus is still languishing at Rhodes, but I now have the capability to add some cavalry to his army, so I go ahead and do that to balance out his force sum. During the intern phase, the last Hunnic horde at Uvavum moves back east, but they're joined by Attila, who appears out of the fog at the head of his new army. The Venetians ask for a defensive alliance, not a tremendously beneficial arrangement for me, but they're offering me money, so I decide to go ahead and take it for now. The Illyrian agents continue causing trouble for me, harassing the Children of the Forest and trying but failing to trap Kyrillos. Unfortunately, the younger Friedebald has lived up to his reputation for being unlucky, as he's died of natural causes at the relatively young age of 42. I wind up replacing him with Trapstila, a 30-year-old man with the mole characteristic, not a skin blemish, but something that should make him better at infiltrating the enemy. Bitharicus rounds out his army with some crossbowmen to provide range support. Then Saphrax takes the thunder of lightning in against the Budinians, who have continued raiding my region of Tremontium. They escape from his initial assault, battered but weakened, but they're unable to evade Saphrax's pursuit, and he tracks them down and destroys their horde, which in turn is the end of their faction. With research complete on local nobility, I get back to work on family workshops in the civic technology tree. Now we have Attila and the few hordes that remain near him. Hermenegild gets a successful harass attempt against the wrath of Erlik, and Kyrillos is able to accomplish the same action with a critical success. The Seekers of Glory and the Children of the Forest assault the last remaining Illyrian region at their capital of Iuvavum, where Vizimar long ago emancipated this people from their Roman oppressors. Although they have a reasonable-sized force defending, along with the garrison, they're mostly steppe levy troops and not really a match for Hermenegild or Dromihete's men, and certainly not combined, so I get a very good balance bar and auto-resolve the battle. Dromihete then sacks the city for a nice profit, over 4,000. I move both armies back to the relative safety of Augusta Vandalicorum, where they're reinforced by the Ostrogothic garrison, along with Hermanfried's Glorious Reavers. Argebaud and the Solitude also go marauding against the Western Roman Separatists, attacking Sirmium and destroying the small garrison before sacking and then razing the city. At Ravenna in Venetia, I break down the settlement structure and upgrade the chieftain's hall. Swinthila then brings his army in from the west, garrisoning the giants outside Aquileia, while Indulf adds another unit of Germanic spearmasters to the oath. I move the Blackwaters into port at Syracuse and release the mercenary ships, hiring some superior Vandal vessels, including some heavy marauders and battery ships. At this point, I go ahead and end the turn, wanting to save up some money for settlement conversions next turn. During the end-turn phase, the Visigoths ask for Swinthila, a daughter of Genseric, in marriage. She's got a fairly serious alcohol addiction, it seems, so I'm more than happy to part ways with her. Even more Huns appear at Uberzus, and Attila consolidates his vast armies in the desolate region east of Uvavum. They have 5 armies, 4 of them full stacks, so they should be almost unassailable in this position, although they must be taking substantial rivalry penalties. The Sclavenians ask for a defensive alliance, and although I'm not sure if I should, I go ahead and accept it, hoping that they'll at least give me a buffer from the nomad tribes should they veer south into the Balkan Peninsula. Asia then offers to join my war against the Huns for 340 gold, and Genseric has to hide his smile as he pays the money to them. I'm dealing with yet more agent actions from the incredibly irritating Illyrians this turn. I've also reappointed most of my political officers, although some bribery and political maneuvering are required. Cindrid again makes a strike against the Purifying Flames, and this time he's successful in his harass army attempt. Saphrax and the Thunder and Lightning then finally set off in their quest to Asia, their first order of business to defend the Lord's kingdom at Constantinople, embarking into the Sea of Marmara. My 2 heroes get in amongst them, in making their harass attempts against the terrible throng of Huns east of Uvavum. Meanwhile, Genseric's son Hermenegild has had all he can stand of the Illyrian resistance and moves in once more to wreck their settlement at Uvavum. And this time he doesn't leave one stone on top of another, burning the whole thing to the ground, the Children of the Forest finally finishing, over 30 years later, what they first started. Hermenegild has hit rank 7 now, and this somewhat peculiar man that seems to embody traits of both Vismar and Genseric is now himself almost a legend among the Vandals for his exploits in Italy and Gaul. Indulf and Swinthila now begin to move east, slowly beginning the encirclement of Attila and his hordes. Gripas and the Carian Crows bring up the rear of Aquileia, adding some Germanic horsemen to give the army some potency it has been lacking for some time.
We need good fighters.
To the southeast, Argebaud and the Solitude also close in on Attila's flank, and bringing themselves closer to the Western Roman Separatist target of Sopione. Mercenary Captain Vatharicus and the Madness are just about replete with excellent troops, although I'd like to equip his men with some siege engines. I have none available at Rhodes, so I settle for a cavalry heavy force that should be able to really rampage in an open field battle, even if they won't be so good for storming the gates of a settlement. Likewise, the Blackwaters continue their conversion from a fleet of weak mercenaries to a strong Vandal navy, adding still more heavy marauder ships. I have quite a bit of wealth now, and I use some of it at Attila to upgrade the jetty at Neapolis, and at Sahara to finally start working toward a Tier 2 settlement at Garama. At Ravenna, where I start the lengthy and costly settlement conversion process, and finally at Tremontium, where I begin the upgrade to a Tier 2 settlement. I'm done spending and maneuvering for now, so I go ahead and end the turn to see if the Huns or Sassanids will react. The Sassanids do bring in a priest to act against Cindrid at Constantinople, but otherwise maintain their siege. The Huns, meanwhile, make their move against me, with Attila bringing forward his horde and 2 others to attack Hermenegild. Even with the reinforcing Ostrogothic garrison, the odds are heavily against me, so Hermenegild pulls back. Fortunately, this takes the Children of the Forest out of range. Last turn, I took Dromihete out of the Seekers of Glory to make way for a new younger general named Godegisel, a son of the now deceased former governor of Lusitania, Redigasus, perhaps named out of gratitude for his adoption into the noble family. This turn, I bring Dromihete back into his wheelhouse as captain of the Black Waters. He finishes off the recruitment this turn, and by next turn he'll be back to having a proper full-strength Vandal navy. Cindrid has success again this turn, harassing the Purifying Flames. However, this seems to have blocked Saphrax's route to the shore, so for now he remains stuck in the Sea of Marmara and unable to land his transports to mount an attack. Even so, he's now in reinforcement range, and his strength added to Genseric's is enough to temporarily drive back the Sassanid army, freeing Genseric to finally start repairing the city. In addition to the repairs, Genseric also starts building an Arian chapel in the city. To the north, Argebaud is free to bring the Solitude in against the lightly guarded Western Roman Separatist city of Sopione, overcoming the garrison with ease and subsequently ravaging the countryside. Indulf and Swinthila move up through the northeastern mountain passes of the Alps, still slowly closing in on the Huns near Augusta Vindelicorum, while the Children of the Forest consolidate alongside the Seekers of Glory and the Glorious Reavers outside the walls of the city to present a strong defense to the would-be Hun assault. It's quite detrimental, however, that simply the presence of the Huns in the same region is totally preventing the army replenishment thanks to the Horsemen of the Apocalypse faction abilities. Along with famine, death, and war, they also seem to have brought pestilence.
My son, those were dark days, with the sun setting on an empire which, run through though it was with corruption and injustice, had shined as a beacon of civilization. On came rapacious hordes of many names and of many peoples. The world we live in today was built by the sweat and toil of honest labor, but shaped in sometimes swift and violent, and sometimes cruel and agonizing strokes by the ambitious, the callous, and the mad. Among the many named and nameless tribes and warlords to plunder the West, Attila and his Hunnic warriors were by far the greater enemy, encroaching ever west and sweeping across the land like locusts, feeding on the fruits of other men's labors and digesting civilization where they encountered it, until a barren wasteland strewn with hovels was all that remained. The Roman villas were abandoned and men retreated to the hilltop fortresses where the seeds of the future were sequestered. Women and children, wise old men, books and knowledge. Even where the walls kept the invaders at bay, sometimes they brought with them an invisible enemy shuffling and moaning, vomiting or expectorating blood and bile. The pestilence came from the hordes, but it passed through walls, flew across great distances, and spread like wildfire in the cities. No one was safe, and we knew then that even God was against us.
The madness are now at full strength, or completely mad, if you will, and Vitericus embarks his army, sailing east toward Antioch, which has fallen into the hands of the Atropatene. I also spend much of the wealth at Insulae Orientalis, upgrading the granary, the chieftain's hall, and the pastures. Following this, I end the turn once again. The Quadians rebuff an attack by the Caledonians, who are sent fleeing southward. The Sassanids resume their siege once again at Constantinople, and Attila brings his 3 hordes north from Augusta Vindelicorum to assault the Geats between Augusta Trevorum and Casurgis. Far to the east, the Abasgia also seem to have come under heavy siege by the 2 Hunnic hordes at their capital of Anacopia. We learn that the Caledonians' ill-fated attack on the Quadians has evidently ended in their utter demise, and the last of the Celtic factions has become extinct. I also learned that revolt is imminent in Lugdunum, where I've neglected to do very much in the way of stabilizing the public order. For the longer term, I start building a town center, but for the more immediate problem I need a military crackdown, so I put Argebaud, the outside noble, not the family member, in charge of a small mercenary garrison force just to keep the peace. Just to be clear, there are now 2 Argebauds, both of similar age and both in charge of armies, but one is a member of the royal family and one isn't. First, the Children of the Forest and then the Giants move north in pursuit of the Huns, followed thereafter by the Carian Crows and the Oath. Genseric again drives back the Sassanids from Constantinople, and this frees the landing zone for Saphrax to finally move ashore in Asia. I hire a few mercenaries to flesh out his force, and then Sindrid further harasses the Purifying Flames. With the eastern incursions having come so close to the Carthage, Isthmus now mobilizes his army and embarks eastward with the Brothers of Stone. Meanwhile, the Blackwaters have finished their recruitment and retrofitting at Syracuse, and Dromihete takes them east from the island. One of the Hunnic hordes carrying disease attacks Hermenegild's army, the Children of the Forest, and now they too have contracted the contagion. The balance bar is not too heavily against me, but I'm still concerned about facing such elite units in a field battle. So Hermenegild falls back to safety. The Quadians ask for a military alliance, and I agree, being able to use all of the allies I can get at this point. The Aria attack the Eastern Roman-held settlement of Agilus, and in spite of the nearby Eastern Roman army, they're able to get into the city and burn it to ashes before the Eastern Romans know what hit them. The Atropatene send 2 armies against Vitericus, who has landed near Antioch, but he makes a swift retreat to move back from their range of attack. At the start of the following turn, I finished my research project on family workshops, which finalizes the third tier of civic technologies for a boost to wealth from subsistence. I move on to the next tier of civic technologies by starting work on royal minting, which will allow access to the highest tier of trade and fishing ports and the amber and slave markets, all of which could provide large boosts to my economy. Cindrid assaults a Sassanid agent at Nicomedia, successfully wounding but not killing them. Saphrax then takes his army forth to lay siege to the Sassanid-held Ankara, one of the few non-desolate regions left in Asia Minor. Saphrax doesn't have the artillery in his army, so the Thunder and Lightning set about the construction of siege equipment. Dromihete and the Blackwaters continue their journey east through the Mediterranean Sea, his fleet coming to anchor just off the coast of Rhodes. Vithericus brings the madness north, not quite in range of Iconium, which is held by the Arya, leaving the pursuing Atropatene armies behind him. Indulf and the other Vandal armies continued their encirclement of Attila and his hordes at Uberzus, Hermenegild falling back to Argentorum, while Indulf, Hermanfried, and Swinthila secure the eastern path through the forest. What little wealth I have left for the turn is spent at Galicia, building a new town center at Bokhara and upgrading the pastures at Asturica. Our allies the Saxons have very generously lent their assistance in attacking the Huns by sending their own agents against Attila and his hordes in spite of their own perpetual problems with the Franks. The hordes to the east make little progress, apparently having been distracted by the Quadians, while Attila and one of the adjacent hordes head southwest. By the time it's our turn again, I'm most eager to bring Vithericus in against the Arya at Iconium, and the madness, unbalanced both of mental state and force composition as they are, managed to completely overrun the city's defenses without any problems. Vithericus sacks and then razes the city for tremendous profit. Meanwhile, Saphrax continues his siege of Ankara, continuing to build the great siege engines that will enable his elite men to cross the walls into the city. Hermanfried's men, suffering as they are from disease, encounter the similarly pox-ridden and mostly mercenary force of the Children of the Larch at Uberzus, and the glorious rivers are reinforced by the local Saxon garrison. Hermanfried manages to win a decisive victory, killing the enemy commander and driving the Hun Accord beyond the borders of the region. Swinthila and Indulf then move west, to bring themselves just north of Attila and his two remaining hordes in the area. Venethaharus gets a successful misdirect army attempt against Attila, which should help us to pin down the Hunnic king even more, while Hermenegild the hero weakens the adjacent Golden Army. His ravages north of the Danube completed, Argebaud brings the Solitude back to Macedonia to replenish, while Hethan works against a force of the Aphragids, the scions of Xerxes, who are raiding outside of Constantinople, but have not yet made a move against the city itself, with Genseric remaining stationary there with the Larchan prows. We'll leave the story here for now. We, along with our allies, the Eastern Roman Empire, have launched aggressive eastern campaigns about the Black and Red Seas respectively, but meeting resistance from the Sassanids and their many allies. The Huns have become weakened by disease, but their ravaging hordes have spread the plague throughout the land, passing on the pestilence to the regional peoples and any armies they encounter. Indulf has led his armies in a patient but steadfast manner, slowly tightening his containment of Attila around Uberzus and Augusta Vendilacorum. An important strategic victory against the Huns seems imminent, but as seemingly endless horsemen pour into the land from the eastern steppe, it remains to be seen whether Indulf can achieve a lasting triumph in this war. Thanks for watching, and join me again next time for another episode of March to the Sea.